Welcome to Straight Up Dog Talk, a new kind of podcast where no topic is off limits. We're bringing in experts and owners to have the conversations we should be having as a dog community. Each week, a new guest will share firsthand experiences, educational resources, or professional guidance to help you learn and grow along with your dog. You won't get one perspective here, you'll get them all, because every dog is different and every owner is too.
You can follow along on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Straight Up Dog Talk, or by visiting www.straightupdogtalk.com. Tune in from any of your favorite podcast platforms.
Welcome to Straight Up Dog Talk. We're back again this week with a new episode. I'm here again, as usual, your host, Em, and Josh is also here.
Hello.
And tonight we're going to be talking with Molly about her dog, Polo, who, when she rescued him, turned out to be heartworm positive. How are you doing tonight, Molly?
I'm good, thank you. Very excited to be here.
We're very excited to have you here.
And Polo in the background here.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and just do a little introduction here. Let's introduce yourself, introduce your dogs, talk a little bit about your home life, and then we'll get into Polo's story.
So I'm Molly, and I'm Polo's mom. As we said, I've always been a crazy dog lover. We currently have 4 dogs. At the time we got Polo, we had 5, and that's us, I guess.
Polo was actually a stray when you found him. It's kind of a unique story, so why don't you tell the listeners Polo's rescue story?
So my family and I are from Massachusetts, but I went to school at the University of Alabama and went traveling back for a football game and was driving down the road when I saw a dog on the side of the highway and immediately just kind of went into action and blacked out, honestly. And next thing I know, I had this dog. He had likely been abandoned intentionally due to the location of where he was, very remote area, and his condition that he was in. He was in really bad shape. He was skinny. He was dirty. Just clearly like a neglected dog. So that's how I found him.
And what breed?
He's a bully, like pit bull bully mix.
He is a red and white, tan and red white he kind of looks like Fitz as far as coloring and patterning goes. He's very, very cute.
I didn't get a super good look at him, but I was thinking he was Shiba Inu.
Oh, that's Georgia.
Oh, okay.
That's one of the other 4.
Yeah, that was Georgia.
That's one of the other 4, which Georgia will come back for a different episode. But Polo, like you said, you found him on the side of the road and you took him to a rescue, correct?
Yes. So we took him to the shelter to have him scanned for a chip. They right away kind of knew that he didn't have an owner based on they're very familiar with the areas and it's a very common dumping spot for dogs. But they scanned him for a chip anyways, and he stayed at the shelter to complete a stray hold just in case, just to kind of cover all of our bases with that. And then he was neutered and vaccinated. And this is all while we're living in Massachusetts, and this is all happening in Alabama. So we're like a 20-hour drive away. And we hired a dog sitter to pick him up after he was neutered. Well, he had to wait for an in-between time to leave on transport and be transported to us up in Massachusetts.
And how old did they think that Polo was when you found him?
He was about a year to 2 years old.
Okay. So he was
young, but an adult dog.
Yeah, not a puppy, not a small puppy. And originally the plan wasn't to adopt Polo, was it?
No. So at the time we had 4 dogs of our own, 4 to 5 dogs within our extended family. And so we were not planning on keeping him. We had also always mostly had very small dogs and toy breeds. So we had planned to foster Polo. I kind of fell in love with him very quickly, only being with him one night that first night, but the shelters there are high kill, lots of illness that runs rampant. It's just not a good place for a dog. So we kind of just couldn't leave him behind. So the plan was to get him neutered, to get him vaccinated, to get him to Massachusetts, where the rescue crisis is still bad, but not quite as bad as Alabama as well. There's not as many dogs in shelters. So we had planned to find him a home. We had little cards with all his information written up, and we would take him out and we met people and he did meet and greets, but we just fell in love with him and he was meant to be part of the family.
And getting Polo to you guys was actually quite a long process due to the overpopulation crisis. It took quite a bit of time to get him to you. I know you said that you had him neutered and you had him vaccinated, you had him chipped and all of the things, and then you hired a sitter to take care of him in between the time that it took to get him transported to you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the sitter that you hired, because what you did there was actually a really great idea. And I think sharing this experience with the listeners is really important for somebody who's trying to adopt out of another state and having a dog transported.
Yeah. So our options were a lot more limited being in a different state compared to we had to handle the situation a lot differently than we would if we were looking for a dog sitter in our own hometown. It was kind of a different process, and it was an emergency situation. We didn't know exactly when his neuter would be until a day or two before, and then it was just he needed someone to pick him up or he'd be automatically surrendered back to the shelter. So we used Rover, which I have heard all sorts of different things about. It's not necessarily something I would recommend, but you can also find good luck there. And we had a vet tech that we hired from Rover. We felt a lot more comfortable to know her place of work and to get a reference that way and know that she really had a lot of experience with dogs, especially because we didn't really know anything about this dog. We didn't know his condition. We didn't know how socialized he was. We didn't know anything. I had only been with him for probably just under 24 hours. So having someone that was educated with dogs was very important, especially in this case, and especially with Polo being a bully breed. There's someone experienced that's not going to be prejudiced towards him or concerned about that aspect.
And it took you about a month total to get him through this whole process and staying with the vet tech for a few weeks and then getting him transferred to you. Can you talk a little bit about how you found the transportation and how that worked?
Yes. So actually, we had used transportation before. We have 2 rescues from Houston, Texas that we had transported to us in Massachusetts. We didn't arrange their transport. It was done all through the rescue. And we knew that transporting dogs like rescue dogs was an option. And we happened to really luck out that our dog sitter also coordinated transport for rescue. So we had a couple options of transport that we were looking into, but we ultimately, the transport that she had the connection with would be leaving sooner, which was a lot better for him to get him out and get him into a stable environment quickly. But we needed someone on that end too to like have him prepared for transport and have his rabies information and his health certificate that needed to be done. Can't be done more in advance than 48 hours, but needs to be done within 24 to 48 hours before they leave, and different requirements. So it was very helpful to have an in-between person for that.
And again, I really think that what you did there was a very smart idea, hiring a vet tech as your go-between, being a retired vet tech and a retired pet sitter. I know that my education and my knowledge of pets' needs, especially after a neuter surgery or recently vaccinated, just things that we're more aware of because that's what we're trained to look for. And just like you said, there's not the breed prejudice that would come with other pet sitters or just other people in general, because there are breed prejudices. There are people that don't like certain breeds of dogs. And I mean, I could say that even about myself. There are breeds that I prefer over others, but that doesn't mean that I would treat a dog differently, because it's my job literally to not treat them differently. Just referencing back to Rover again real quick. Rover can be a really great tool, and it is something that I will tell the listeners that absolutely, if you have a Rover in your area, check it. But do exactly what Molly did. Look for somebody who is a vet tech. Look for somebody who has references. Look for somebody who has a reliable and high rating on Rover. And if you don't want to use Rover, ask your friends and family. Go to your veterinarian. Ask them if there's somebody that they recommend. Ask them if they have vet techs that pet sit. If you don't want to do kennel boarding and you want to have somebody in your home that you trust, find a vet tech. Firsthand experience, find a vet tech or find a trainer, like we talked about with Lauren in a previous episode, a trainer who is also a pet sitter and runs her own pet sitting business, because finding the right care for your pets is truly, truly important, especially when you have a pet with a medical condition like diabetes or going through treatment or post-surgery. Again, all those things are really important to note. So again, I commend you on that, because that was a very, very, very smart choice. So now it's taken us a month, but we have Polo and he's settling into life at your home. Mm-hmm. Why don't we talk a little bit about initially how everything was going, and then what maybe indicated you to finding out that he was heartworm positive?
So Polo came, he had different health concerns, as in his weight, but managed that we didn't feel the need to rush him into. We were looking to put weight on Polo. We were wanting to improve his skin and coat health, just kind of his overall. He wasn't healthy, but he didn't have any main health concerns. He had worms. We treated that within a day or two. So he was generally becoming a healthy dog. And then months after having him, we decided to get him seen by our local vet, and he went in for kind of his early annual appointment, and they did a heartworm test just completely as routine. He had been on heartworm preventative since before he left Alabama. The vet tech who was watching him got him set up on it while we were there, and then he continuously was taking that every month with us. So we were not worried about him having heartworm.
So that's a question that I have as somebody that's a dog parent but not experienced with this. I mean, first of all, we live in Iowa. Mm-hmm. And so I do not give my dog 12 months out of the year her heartworm. I know I probably should, but I do not, or have not. If a dog is on a heartworm preventative and something has happened, first of all, will the preventative take care of heartworm if heartworm's already introduced? And second of all, what are the chances of a dog contracting heartworm in like winter months?
So heartworm preventatives, I know HeartGuard has a warranty guarantee. If you give your dog heartworm every month and you go in every 2 years in the state of Iowa and get a heartworm negative test, and you prove that you have purchased a year's worth of heartworm medication, you give it every month, and 2 years from now, you've done this, you go in, you retest, you've given it reliably every single month, HeartGuard will pay for the treatment or pay for a portion of the treatment. If you
we use Simparica Trio because it's got all the different flea tick, heartworm, all of that in one.
It's brand, I don't know as much about Simparica because it was not a thing when I was a vet tech. That's more of a recent thing. I can speak to HeartGuard because I know HeartGuard. But they will pay for a portion or part of it. I would imagine that Simparica is also the same. Any veterinarian, anywhere you go in the United States is going to say, if you want to rotate your flea and tick medication based on climate, Massachusetts like Molly, Iowa like us, based on when it starts to freeze. 32 degrees at night consistently, it's getting cold, there's starting to be frost on the ground, that kind of thing. Like my dogs they usually get it October, November, depending on how cold it gets here, because the temperature fluctuates so much for flea and tick. But then heartworm preventative, they get year round no matter what. Because the thing about heartworm is that it's mosquitoes, and mosquitoes can live in weird places, in weird temperatures. You can have a nest in your basement and not know about it. There's all kinds of things that can happen if you're traveling. If you go to another, state and you take your dog with you and you haven't thought, oh, I should give my heartworm preventative a month before we travel and the month that we do travel, and now your dog's in a Florida climate and not protected because you traveled with your dog. There's all kinds of different reasons, but pretty much everywhere you go, every veterinarian will tell you heartworm year-round, flea and tick can be flexible depending on your climate. So because you give the trio, I would recommend talking to your vet and seeing, can she be on the heart guard and the next guard, or can we just switch her to heart guard for 6 months so that we don't have to double up and have her. That's a conversation, obviously, have with your vet.
I totally understand that. But in a case like this where heartworm is already introduced into the dog, would a heart guard preventative being introduced help at all? Or is it just they're already in there?
It will slow down the process.
Perfect. That's what I'm looking for.
Slow down the progression of the heartworm, which in Molly's case, they did determine that Polo had heartworm prior to coming to Massachusetts. As, being an abandoned dog, 1 to 2 years old on the side of a road, it definitely was not her fault. It was not something that she did. And they did testing, which I will let Molly tell you about all of the testing that they did.
So, yeah, that's what I was going to say with, if you go off of it, that's something I wasn't aware of. Our dogs are on heartworm year round, but I was not aware when he was tested in Alabama that heartworm can take up to 6 months to show up positive on a test. So I think also if you were to take a break and maybe test your dog in between before you go back on, just to be really safe, that isn't necessarily going to be a proper indicator, because your dog could have heartworm and it didn't show up yet. That's what happened in Polo's case, is we either got a false negative, or they weren't mature enough adult worms yet of bullied to show up in the tests, and I had no idea before. Otherwise, we would have had him immediately tested when he arrived to Massachusetts again. But with him having no symptoms and having the negative test, we never thought that was an issue.
So when you went into your vet and then you find out that he's heartworm positive, I know that you said at the time you didn't know a lot about the heartworm condition, how it was contracted, how it was treated, all of the things. So you guys used a research tool, the heartwormsociety.org, which we'll provide in the episode notes for everybody so they can take a look at it too. You use that in conjunction with your veterinarian's recommendations. So tell us a little bit about what the veterinarian said and, how they diagnosed it and decided what stage he was at as far as progression.
Yeah. So the day that I took him into the vet called us that night to tell us that the test was positive. I almost honestly didn't even pick up the call. I was in the middle of something and I knew it was going to be his results. And in my head, I knew it was going to be negative. We weren't at all concerned. He had just said for that day, he said, I recommend the American Heartworm Society. Look into that. Here's this link and do your research. And tomorrow morning, let's talk about a plan and we'll schedule him for some labs and some scans. So we took that time period to kind of prepare ourselves. It has a lot of good resources, statistics, common questions that you have. And we had a lot of questions, of course, so it helped us get a good understanding. Polo then went within a couple of days to get a bunch of blood work done and to get some scans done. He went to the vet all day. He got sedated to get scans and everything to then see where his body was at and see if any of his other organs had been affected and see kind of the stage of where his heartworm was at. And that was really nerve-wracking too. From the beginning, our vet had said before the test that due to Polo's age, his health, and the fact that he was not symptomatic of the heartworms yet, that they did think that it was likely he would be a good candidate for treatment and he would respond well. But not knowing if his heartworm had affected something else, that there are dogs who have long-lasting health conditions from heartworm that recover from the heartworm itself, but the worms have damaged another organ or another part of their body, and that's something that then they have to live with for the rest of their lives. So that was a really scary thought too, that okay, like we maybe have a plan in place for the heartworm, but what if there's something else? So we have this active 1 to 2 year old happy dog, and what if we find out now that he's going to have a forever health condition? So that testing was done to also just also reassure that he was a good candidate for treatment.
Exactly. And there are a lot of factors. Heartworm treatment is probably one of the scariest and potentially most dangerous treatments for dogs to go through. It is something that does kill dogs. Older dogs typically do not survive. And making sure that your dog is a candidate for heartworm treatment is something that is very important. So going through all of that testing is incredibly important because, you know, with scans and x-rays and things like that, you can see the worms in the heart. You can see where they're at, how big they are. Again, like she said, if they have expanded into other areas of the body. And depending on the age, depending on the weight, depending on the size of the dog, the veterinarian can then determine based on blood work and scans and all of these factors if the dog will survive the treatment or if you're looking at a hospice to humane euthanasia kind of situation. I can tell you as a vet tech, I have seen heartworm treatment go both ways, good ways and bad ways. We have had several successful cases, and I have seen other dogs. One in particular that I will never forget was a Great White Pyrenees, 11 years old, had the first injection, and she stroked out. So it is a very, very scary thing. And having your dogs on preventative meds is something that is extremely important, especially if you're in the southern states where it's warm all year round, because you definitely have a higher risk at that point. So now at this point, we've decided that Polo is a good candidate, and you decided to go ahead and go forward with the treatment. Tell us a little bit about how that process went for you.
So we didn't know anything really about heartworm. I knew the general, like that heartworm, of course, they have worms in their heart, and that it's very bad and it can be fatal. But we were completely new to how they treat this or anything. So we started with multiple rounds of antibiotics. He was on, I think, like 12 or so pills a day he was getting, multiple times a day, some 3 times, some twice. And my understanding of that is to get him prepared for the treatment and to kind of clear up any sort of damage caused by the worms and kind of get him in the best shape possible for the actual treatment itself, because the treatment is so intense. So we did that for, I think, around 3 months. I know that I've heard it ranges, the prep, depending on your dog's stage of the heartworm, if they're symptomatic, age, etc. Of that some dogs will be 6+ months of antibiotics and preparing for that. So, or some might maybe be shorter. But that was Polo's plan. All throughout this, he could not be active. We had to keep his heart rate very low, which was very difficult with a 1 to 2 year old dog, that, especially one that didn't have any training, it really set him backwards with all of that. When Polo came, he didn't know what sit was. He didn't know how to use the stairs. He didn't know a lot of general household things. We're not sure if he had ever lived actually in a home before or if he was chained outside. So he had a lot of progress to make. We were starting completely from scratch. And so then to have to completely halt all of that was very difficult. He suffered from severe separation anxiety from being abandoned. And that was something we really had to worry about with elevating his heart. Of course, if your dog is getting anxious and riled up because you're leaving, that's going to elevate their heart rate. So that was an added challenge as well. And then, of course, it's just sad to watch because he wants to play. There's this dog that hasn't had toys and now is so excited he has toys. He's got a backyard to run in and he can't do any of those things anymore. He was kind of just starting to get a taste of the good life, and we had to halt that. And if this same situation were to happen with one of my dogs I had before, it's a little bit easier to say, oh, I'll crate them and you can keep them in the crate and they're contained in things. But with Polo and his separation anxiety, that was a very difficult option. And you don't know either what each individual's dog limit is in terms of elevating their heart rate. So our vet was very upfront and honest with us about, like, when we would ask questions like, how much is too much and what's considered too, and he was very honest, like, we don't know. Like, one dog could handle, Polo potentially could handle, like, going on a walk every day, and maybe that wouldn't cause any damage, but you don't know. And so we kind of just took the situation of, we'd rather be safe than sorry, and tried to just keep him very calm. He was on trazodone and gabapentin, 2 different medications to kind of help to try to take the edge off and have like a sedative effect a bit. But yeah, that was definitely one of the hardest parts of the treatment, was keeping his heart rate down, and no exercise or anything like that.
This is where I would really struggle if Fitz ever got injured, if he got heartworm, if he got something where he had to be restricted on activity levels at all. I would be in a really bad situation because he is such a high energy dog. Were there some things that you did to help with this? Did you use enrichment tools at all to kind of help distract him? Or were there other methods, toys that you used that helped?
Yeah, so enrichment was huge for us. It still is now, just continuously a big part of Polo's life. But that mental, for him to have that, every meal was in feeders and puzzles and snuffle masks and lick masks and any kind of enrichment that we could give him to help. Also, another part of it is being worried, which we kind of took off our plate a bit, but that you have a dog that's now not being active and you want to use food to keep them stimulated, but we kind of didn't worry about the calories for a little bit there. Tried to prioritize. It can be hard when you have a dog that's not active and you kind of just need to, like, feed them all day to keep them calm.
That's one of those things, though, is that you're trading his happiness level and comfort level for his activity level. You were trying to keep him alive versus letting him get too excited and cause himself to have a heart attack or stroke out or something terrible because his activity level got too high. So obviously, there's a little bit of that guilty feeling in there. But again, that's what we're trying to do with this podcast, is remove that guilty feeling, because you were doing what was absolutely necessary and absolutely the highest and best possible outcome for your dog. So I think that,
using those tools and then continuing to actively use those tools in his life afterwards probably just continues to be a positive reinforcement, and he doesn't look back on that as a negative experience because of it.
Mm-hmm.
So after Polo had the first injection, how did things change?
So when Polo had the first injection, we had known that it was typically a very painful injection. Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they inject it directly into the muscle, and it was described to me as, I bet, in like the simplest terms, as it's kind of like a toxin, or like it's meant to kill these worms. It's very strong. It's very potent. It's not something you ideally want to ever happen to your dog's body unless you absolutely need it because they have heartworms. And that it can be very painful. So we dropped Polo off about like half an hour before a vet officially opened for the day to get him checked in, and they gave him his injection, and then he stayed at the vet throughout the day to monitor him. You don't know, of course, your dog typically has never had anything similar to an injection like this, so they like to monitor to make sure that he didn't have any kind of adverse reaction to it or anything was wrong. So he stayed at the vet, and then we picked him up probably like 4 o'clock, and I got him home and was ready to just kind of get him settled in, and he was a completely different dog. He did a total 180, and I, for the first like half hour, have probably almost the whole half hour recorded on my phone because I was like, what am I witnessing? And I I need to send these to the vet. And I was alone with him at first. I had just picked him up. My whole family, my sister, my mom, my dad all came home because I was freaking out. He was whimpering. He looked like he was struggling to even just walk. He was in so much pain. He couldn't get comfortable, so he kind of kept wanting to crawl and pull himself up onto the couch, but then he'd want to get down, and he'd lay down, and then he'd stand up because he just could not get comfortable. He was so uncomfortable and in so much pain. He was whimpering and crying nonstop. He was shaking really rapidly every once in a while as if he got like a horrible chill, which was very scary. He peed all over himself on the couch because he couldn't move or like get himself off the couch and was soaked in it. Within just like a minute, he's incredibly food motivated. Like he's crazy, something we struggle with a little bit because he thinks all food is for him. He's a counter surfer. He goes in the trash and he wouldn't eat anything. We got treats. We got even like bits of human food just to like know if he had any sort of appetite and meat, and he wouldn't eat anything. He couldn't use the stairs. And it was just really horrible to watch. Like I said, he's like the happiest dog. He has no shame. Like he never thinks he does anything wrong. He's never like nervous. He's just like happy. But if he does like steal food from the counter, he thinks everything's great. And so to watch him turn into this very sad dog, and he kept coming over to each of us in the room and would kind of nudge at us with his nose and just like look at us and whine as if he was just like asking for help because he was in so much pain. And it felt like having a very sick, arthritic senior dog all of a sudden. And we called the vet, of course, immediately early on. And the part that was really hard for me is that that's all very normal with heartworm treatment. And Polo actually, if anything, I was not on the far scale of responding to it. Like he could have been a lot worse. There are plenty of dogs that are in even more pain than Polo was. I was running through his symptoms with them, his levels, and they were not really phased at all. They were like, unfortunately, this is what this medication does.
It is unfortunate. It is what the medication does. It is a very trying process to put a dog through. Not every owner is allowed to take their dogs home with them. Sometimes the dogs have to stay at the veterinary office in confinement for weeks, sometimes months, depending on, the condition of the dog, the heart rate, all things that clearly you were very responsible about, but not everybody can be home to monitor those things, or the severity of the case can really kind of determine whether or not the veterinarian feels comfortable having the dog at home. A lot of times, though, the dog does go home just because dogs tend to be less reactive when they're in their own home. They're more comfortable. They'll relax and chill out a little bit more without as much effort as they would in the veterinary office. But again, I have seen it go both ways. Obviously, the first shot was very difficult for him. Did that continue to be the case for the other 2 injections?
It did get better as the injections went on. It wasn't quite as extreme of reaction, but he was definitely still very sore and very much in pain. I think part of it too was we knew what to expect a little bit more and had braced ourselves. We weren't sure if it would get worse. We were thinking maybe for the second shot, but it did seem to get a little bit better, but it was still just as hard to watch and see him go through that. And also the first shot, after probably the first 24 to 48 hours, seemed like a big difference, but like he couldn't really like get up on furniture. We had to be very careful because of how much pain he was in, and we had to really be completely attentive. Like someone and people in our family took off work ahead for his shots. Like someone was around, if not typically 2 or 3 people, 24/7, because you want your dog to be comfortable. And so like if he wants to get on the bed, we don't want to make him also, while he's in pain and he's seeking comfort and he's seeking us, we don't want to make him like sleep on the floor. But we weren't able to pick him up or really assist him because it can be too much pressure on them when they're going through this treatment. So we would just have like 2 people on either side of him to kind of like catch him when he would fall back a little, but we couldn't really help him. And we also didn't want to restrict him entirely when he's just trying to get comfortable. We kind of wanted him to be able to do what made him comfortable as well, and try to like stick to his normal routine as much as possible, because he was very scared of what was going on and very uncomfortable. So we wanted to try to keep things as normal as possible.
And that is really important, because heartworm treatment is not an instant fix. It is a process. It takes several months to go through heartworm treatment. And then after that, it can sometimes be 1 or more tests, depending on your veterinarian, before you actually have a heartworm negative test. So when did you finally get the all clear for him? When did he test negative for heartworm?
So he just tested negative this past September. I think it was about 9 months after his last injection. They like to be really sure that you're not getting a false positive, and it can take time. The same way it takes time to show up positive, it can take time to show up correctly on the test that it's negative, and they don't want to send anyone into panic. And even if your dog tests positive again at the retest, they wait a couple months, retest again. They don't administer another round of treatment right away. They would follow up with a second test before doing that. So it's better to just wait it out. So that was hard. That once he was done, we felt very relieved that his treatment was done. And there was never really any talk of what happens if he tests positive again, because that wasn't expected. But at the same time, we still had probably almost 9 months or so of waiting and not knowing for sure that he was in the clear, or if we were going to have to go through more of this process.
And that is the other thing about heartworm treatment. Not only does it take time, but sometimes it's not always successful the first time. And it is something that you have to build your dog's health back up and then go through again. And it can also, be very rigorous on their body and their personality and their lifestyle, in addition to the fact that it is extremely expensive. So after going through all of this with Polo and experiencing how awful the treatment is, the healing, the recovery, just the whole ordeal, what is the best advice you can give to people who are looking to get a dog, to people who have a dog, to people who have questions about what they need to do for heartworm treatment? What's the best advice you can give to somebody in those situations?
I think the advice that I would give to anyone in general looking to get a dog is you need to look at the expected costs and the expected care that goes into a dog. And you also need to expect the unexpected. Like, we got Polo. We didn't expect to have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars and take time off work and go through all of this treatment with him. But we had to be ready to. Like, this was our dog. We were committed to him. We'd do anything for him. So I think if you can't plan out the little things like giving a preventative every month and paying the $10, $12 a month, then maybe you're not ready at this time to get a dog. And I can completely understand if that's something that someone can't afford at the time, but just a dog, it's not the right time for you to get a dog. I would highly recommend that people have their dog on that, and putting that into their bodies, in my opinion, is a lot better than having to put the heartworm treatment later on into their bodies. It's extremely frustrating to watch too, and knowing that there was no reason he had to go through this. This was preventable, and someone did this to him, or someone's lack of care towards him and the people that had him and were supposed to do everything they can for him, and they neglected to do so. And now we were left to clean up their mess that they had made. And we're still facing like the repercussions of this, of like, we're going through his training now that we probably could have been done with if we didn't have to stop all of that, and things like that. And he got very frustrated too. You have to kind of undo what the heartworm treatment did to them as well. And just even having to sit in a crate, like, that's considered for dogs to not be active and doing things. And if they don't have heartworm treatment, that's considered neglect. I mean, we had to do that in this case, but that's not how a dog should be living, completely calm, crated, not able to have any activity or excitement. So I think, and it's just something that can be prevented. And there's a lot of things that we can't prevent with our dogs. And there's a lot of freak accidents and illnesses and things that come up, and that's hard enough. So I think it's really important. And I think if you're going through something like this, it's really important to do your research. Like I said, I highly recommend the Heartworm Society website. Answered a lot of our questions, not knowing anything about what went into this, and having a good relationship with your vet too, I think is really important. We did a lot of research so that we could understand what was going on, but we didn't necessarily do a ton of research because we wanted to come up with our own treatment. Like, we had a vet that we trusted, and during something like this, I think that's really important, to just be able to kind of go into action and trust your vet and trust their care and their advice, and have that ahead of time before something like this comes up.
I think that's really excellent advice. Dogs are expensive, and especially if you're looking to get a puppy, even if you rescue, sometimes you have to pay for all of their vaccines, and then you have to pay for the spay and neuter, and then you have to pay for preventatives. And cost is definitely something that you need to think about when you're getting into owning a dog. And so I really appreciate you bringing that up. I'm so glad that everything turned out as well as it did with Polo. Because like I said, I have seen worst case scenario happen, and Polo is such a delight. He's such a funny guy. He's really fun to watch on Instagram. Also, he is like so good at just posing for pictures with his little face. He's always just happy to be around doing his thing. So I'm so glad that you were able to come on this episode and share Polo's story with us. And I know you have many other stories to tell about your dog. So we will definitely be having you come back, Molly, and share more stories about your other dogs. But thank you for coming and being open and honest about this situation with us.
And I want to specifically thank you because to pull back the curtain a little bit, we do not record these episodes in order, but this is our 11th episode. And this is the first time that I have taken advantage of kind of the safe space of the podcast because, I think looking back on it, I've actually been thinking about it throughout this episode. It was $70 every 6 months, $140 a year when I would take them in for their yearlies since my first dog. And when I had my first dog, it was a cost that I didn't even really think about. So it was one of those things that I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'll just keep them on it for 6 months. But hearing, I did not know the full effects of treatments, of what it does to a dog, of any of those things. And at this point, I consider $140 a year a bargain. So Artemis will definitely be getting her treatment all year round. I would never, give Polo extra scritches and a treat.
Thank you. I absolutely will.
I actually thank you for saying that because, again, that is exactly what we are trying to do here. And that is part of the reason that I like having you here so much, because you provide this non-social media dynamic for us. And just as a regular dog owner that maybe doesn't get the education, because not every veterinarian educates the same way and not every vet tech informs the same way. And so there are definitely lack of information situations, and there are definitely discrepancies in treatment and information that goes around. So I'm glad that you felt safe to ask questions. And
I did get a little side eye from you.
I mean, I was actually shocked because I didn't know that you didn't do it year round. Yeah, Josh and I have been friends for so long, and I've, worked with his dogs and been friends with him and his wife for a long time. And just because you know somebody doesn't mean you know everything that they do in their lives. So I was honestly a little surprised. It was no judgment. It was more surprise, me going, oh, really? I didn't know that. So again, I'm really glad that you both felt safe to talk about your experiences and ask questions tonight. And Molly, again, thank you so much for being on this episode of Straight Up Dog Talk, and we cannot wait to have you come back.
Yeah, thank you so much. We can't wait to come back, and thank you for the opportunity to hopefully spread some awareness and make some good out of Polo's story that was not so good.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to make everything better for everybody, everything more accessible, and for people to feel seen and understood in tough situations. So thank you again for tuning into this episode of Straight Up Dog Talk, and we will see you guys next week.
Straight Up Dog Talk was created by Emily Breslin. It is edited, produced, and co-hosted by Josh Wasta under the supervision of Straight Up Dog Talk, LLC, and Emily Breslin. If you're enjoying this podcast, follow or subscribe to be sure you don't miss an episode, and leave us a review on your favorite platform. Looking for more honest and relatable dog content? Check out our sister show, Unpacked, with Jerry Sheriff and Madison Simpson. Thanks for listening to Straight Up Dog Talk. See you next week.